I was standing in the wash of red and blue police lights at 6:30 in the morning, trying to keep my hands warm in the damp wind, when the deputy looked at the short wooden fence surrounding Karen's Tesla and asked me, in the same tone people use when they're trying to confirm they heard correctly, "So you're saying she parked here again?" His breath fogged in the cold air, rising above the gravel like smoke, and somewhere behind us my tractor sat idling with its steady diesel rumble mixing with the sound of distant cows calling for feed. The Tesla wasn't damaged, wasn't scratched, wasn't even close to touching the boards. It just sat there blinking its hazard lights inside the waist-high fence I had built around it overnight, like a confused animal in a pen. Karen stood a few feet away under a flimsy umbrella that kept flipping inside out in the wind, her arms wrapped tightly around herself the way people do when they're trying to squeeze the frustration out of their own bodies. "He trapped my car," she said, pointing at the fence like she expected it to collapse in shame. "He literally built a fence around it." "Who does that?" Her voice wasn't angry so much as stunned, the tone of someone who is experiencing a deeply personal inconvenience and expects the universe to apologize. The deputy looked from her to me and then back at the fence, and I could see him piecing the situation together slowly, like he was tiptoeing his way through it before committing to an opinion. "Let's start from the beginning," he said. "How did your vehicle end up inside his property?" That was the moment I knew this whole situation had finally reached the point where another adult, specifically one with a badge and a notepad, could see I wasn't the irrational one here. But truthfully, this didn't start with fences or cops or hazard lights. It started weeks earlier, on a random Tuesday morning, when the sky was starting to darken with the first hint of a storm, and I was already stressed trying to finish repairs on a stubborn hay baler. My farm sits at the end of a narrow gravel road, the kind where grass grows in the center strip and every passing vehicle kicks up a cloud of dust. 30 acres of pasture, a worn-down red barn, and an old farmhouse with chipped paint. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. The gate is a metal swing gate that opens toward the road, and just beyond it there's a wide patch of gravel the county put in years ago so delivery trucks wouldn't block traffic. For as long as I've lived here, people have respected that space. Then the new winery opened down the road, and suddenly my quiet corner became an unofficial overflow parking lot for strangers who preferred convenience over courtesy. For the most part they kept out of the way, parking farther down the road or staying just long enough to check directions. But then Karen started showing up. I didn't know her name at the time. I just knew her as the woman in the spotless white Tesla who always managed to park in a way that created a problem. The first time she parked right in front of my gate, I walked over, knocked on her window, and gave her the friendliest wave I could manage while running on too little sleep. She cracked her window a few inches like there was a risk farm air might contaminate the interior. I told her politely that I needed to swing the gate open and asked if she could pull forward or back just a little. She sighed like I'd asked her to relocate her entire life and muttered that she was just waiting for friends because the winery lot was full. There were at least 3 other places she could have parked without blocking my entrance, but she barely moved the car and only did it after rolling her eyes so dramatically I could practically hear it. The second time, she wasn't even in the car. I had a trailer full of fencing supplies and couldn't get through, so I called the non-emergency line. The deputy tracked her down, explained the law, and she left in a cloud of irritation. That should have been the end of it, but instead it became a pattern, one that grew increasingly petty. She started parking close enough to the gate to make trailer turns difficult but never close enough for police to ticket her. If I got within a few feet of her bumper, she'd whip out her phone like she was collecting evidence. The "Do Not Block Gate" sign I installed disappeared within 48 hours, and when I replaced it, I found it flipped backward. Then came the sticky note in my mailbox. "Maybe don't live on a road if you don't like cars," smiley face, written in tidy cursive. I tried to ignore it. I told myself she'd get bored or embarrassed or inconvenienced enough to stop. But then came the morning everything changed. It was one of those gray, misty mornings where the light feels dull and the air smells like damp soil. I stepped outside with a bucket of feed and immediately heard the soft electric hum of an idling engine. The Tesla was back, angled in the exact same problem spot, but this time she had parked deeper into the gravel area, leaving practically no room for the gate to open at all. And something in me, quiet, tired, resigned, just settled. Not anger. Not spite. Just the realization that she wasn't going to stop unless something made her rethink the habit entirely. I fed the animals first, letting the idea take shape. Then I went to the barn, pulled out the laminated county property map I'd kept from a previous dispute, and measured the distance from the gatepost to her front bumper. The Tesla was completely, undeniably on my land. Not on the road. Not in a public right-of-way. On my land. And fencing your own property is as legal as breathing. So I gathered T-posts, wire, boards, and a post driver. The rain stayed light, just enough to cling to my jacket and make the air smell metallic. I worked slowly, carefully, making sure nothing touched the car. By sunrise, the fence was complete, a neat little rectangle enclosing only the space she had chosen to occupy. An hour later, she arrived, soaked from the drizzle, staring at the fence like she was seeing a magic trick performed badly. "What did you do to my car?" she demanded. "I fenced in part of my property," I said. "You parked inside it." She stared at me, then at the padlocked gate section, then back at me. "I'm calling the police." And now, with the deputy looking between us and the cows lowing in the distance, I felt something I hadn't felt at any point during this whole ordeal. Relief, because finally someone else could see exactly how ridiculous this situation had become. The deputy took a slow breath, the kind people take when they're trying to figure out how much patience the situation requires, and then asked Karen to step closer so he could understand her version. She moved toward him with that stiff, offended posture she always had when things weren't aligning with her expectations, holding her umbrella sideways so the wind wouldn't flip it again, though it still managed to turn inside out with a loud snap that made her flinch. She didn't open with facts, she opened with tone. "I've been parking here for weeks," she said, brushing damp hair from her face. "Everyone knows this area is basically public. I'm not blocking anything. He just doesn't like me." The deputy glanced at me with an expression that made it clear he'd heard similar logic before. "Ma'am," he said, "what made you think this gravel area is public?" She paused, blinking like the question itself surprised her. "Well, it just is," she insisted. "People park here all the time. The winery owner said it was overflow." I raised my hand slightly, not to interrupt, just to signal I had something useful. "The winery owner has no authority over my property," I said. "This whole turnout is private. The county gave me the parcel map when I bought the place. I can get it if you want to see it." Karen rolled her eyes as if facts were optional. "This whole situation is ridiculous," she muttered. "Who builds a fence around a car?" "A tired person," I said quietly. The deputy held up his hand before either of us could say anything else. "All right. Before we go any further, I need to know something important. Is your car damaged?" Karen shook her head reluctantly. "No, but it's fenced in." "But not touched?" "No scratches, no dents." "No," she admitted. The deputy turned toward me. "And you put the fence entirely on your property?" "Yes," I said. "The posts don't touch her vehicle." He nodded, jotting something down. "All right. First glance, it looks like a civil matter. But let me check the map to be sure." I felt a small wave of relief wash through me, not because I wanted Karen to get in trouble, but because we were finally grounding the conversation in something objective instead of her feelings. I walked to the farmhouse, boots crunching on the gravel, and grabbed the laminated property map from the drawer where I kept miscellaneous farm paperwork. When I came back, the deputy was leaning against his cruiser, listening to Karen explain how rural people don't understand modern vehicles, and how electric cars need space. He took the map from me and studied it against the glow of his flashlight, even though the morning light was starting to stabilize. "Ma'am," he said, looking up, "this entire space is his property, including where your car is parked. None of it is public." She stared at the map like she was searching for a loophole. "Well, maybe the map is wrong," she said. The deputy didn't laugh, but the corners of his eyes tightened a little. "Maps aren't wrong," he said. "You're parked on private land without permission." He chose to install a fence around his property. "That's legal." She sputtered, "But he fenced in my car." "Your car was on his land," the deputy repeated, as if explaining the concept to someone not entirely fluent in common sense. "He didn't touch it. He didn't damage it. He fenced his own land." She looked at me like I had single-handedly upset the natural balance of the universe. "You can't expect me to check a map every time I park somewhere." "I expect you not to park in front of my gate," I said. "That's all I've ever expected." Her face tightened, and something flickered behind her expression. Maybe embarrassment, maybe stubbornness, maybe the realization that defending her behavior to someone in uniform wasn't as easy as dismissing me. The deputy cleared his throat and shifted his weight, signaling he was ready to wrap this up. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "Sir, you're not required to remove your fence. Ma'am, you're going to need his cooperation to get your car out, because you can't legally drive across his property without permission." Karen's jaw dropped. "So he can just trap me here?" "Your vehicle isn't trapped," the deputy corrected. "It's just parked somewhere it shouldn't be. If he chooses to unlock the gate section, you can drive out. If he doesn't, you'll need to hire a tow service that can lift the vehicle vertically or dismantle the fence legally with his permission." She turned to me with an expression halfway between disbelief and desperation. "Can you unlock it? I have work today." "I can," I said. "But I need to know you won't park here again. Not in front of the gate, not on this turnout, not anywhere on my land. Ever." She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze dropped to the wet gravel, then lifted to the deputy, as if searching for backup. She got none. Finally, she let out a slow exhale. "Fine," she said. "I won't park here again." Her voice carried that brittle quality people get when they're swallowing pride alongside the truth. I walked to the fence, pulled the padlock key from my pocket, and unlatched the small corner gate I designed specifically for this purpose. "You can back out straight," I said. "Nothing will scrape." She got in carefully, shutting the door with more force than necessary. The Tesla reversed out with its usual near-silent hum, the tires hissing on the wet gravel. When she cleared the last board, she put the car in drive, rolled down the window halfway and said, "This was unnecessary, you know." "So was parking here," I replied. She didn't answer. She drove off faster than she needed to, spraying a small rooster tail of gravel behind her. The deputy watched her go, shaking his head just slightly. "You handled that better than most people would've," he said. "I get why you did it. And for what it's worth, your fence work is pretty clean." "Thanks," I said. "I wasn't trying to make a point. I was just tired." "Well, she got the message," he said. "If she calls us again, we'll have this report on file." When he left, the gravel road settled back into its usual quiet. The wind calmed. The cows lowed from the pasture like they were waiting for the rest of the morning to begin. I stood in the open turnout, looking at the empty space where the Tesla had been, and felt something I hadn't expected, an uneasy mix of satisfaction and nerves. Satisfied because the boundary had finally been acknowledged. Nervous because people like Karen rarely let things go cleanly. Her pride had been bruised, and bruised pride tends to look for somewhere to land. The rain eased into a soft mist, and I walked back toward the barn to feed the animals, trying not to think too far ahead. But even then, before the real escalation started, I had a sense that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. For the rest of that day, I tried to convince myself the situation was resolved, or at least diffused enough that I wouldn't have to think about it again. I fixed the loose hinge on the barn door, checked the fencing in the back pasture, and spent most of the afternoon splitting logs because the steady rhythm of the axe helped clear my head. But every so often, I'd catch myself imagining Karen stewing in her car somewhere, replaying the morning, telling her version of events to someone who would nod sympathetically. People like her rarely absorbed blame, they redistributed it. But nothing happened the next day or the one after. The winery stayed busy, but I didn't see her Tesla anywhere near my road. I started to relax, thinking maybe she meant what she said when the deputy was standing right there. Then, on Friday afternoon, as I was closing the barn for the evening, I noticed a small envelope tucked under the latch of my gate. It wasn't sealed, just folded. I opened it expecting another sarcastic note, maybe something about country manners, or property hoarding. Instead, it was a typed letter on surprisingly expensive paper, the kind people use when they're trying to appear professional. It read, "You are formally notified that your fence constitutes a safety hazard and may be subject to legal action pending review. Removing obstacles that impede free movement may be required by state law." No signature. No name. Just that vague, intimidating tone people use when they want something but don't want to ask directly. I stared at it for a moment, then shook my head and went inside. It didn't mention Karen, but it didn't need to. She had the kind of personality that believed official language made something true. The next morning, I drove into town for feed and stopped by the sheriff's office to ask if any formal complaints had been filed. The clerk checked. Nothing. I told her about the letter. She snorted. "People love trying to sound legal," she said. "If it doesn't have a name, treat it like junk mail." I took the advice, but my stomach nagged at me anyway. People who relied on intimidation usually escalated when intimidation didn't work. And sure enough, the real trouble arrived 2 days later. I was mending a section of fence along the property line when I heard footsteps crunching down the gravel road. When I looked up, I saw Karen approaching, not the annoyed, impatient version I'd seen before, but a strangely calm one, walking with the purposeful stride of someone rehearsing their lines. "We need to talk," she said, stopping just beyond my fence line. "About what?" I asked, wiping mud from my gloves. "About the way you handled that situation the other day." "Which situation?" I knew exactly which one, but I wanted to hear how she framed it. She took a steady breath, folding her hands in front of her like she was about to give a presentation. "Look," she said, "I know things got out of hand. I was frustrated, you were frustrated. But fencing in my car was inappropriate. You escalated something that could have been solved with a simple conversation." I leaned against the fence post. "I tried conversations," I said. "Multiple times." She gave a small, controlled smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "You misunderstand. Those weren't conversations. Those were you telling me what to do. There's a difference." I raised an eyebrow. "Asking someone not to block a gate isn't telling them what to do." She waved her hand dismissively. "That's not the point. The point is, the way you reacted made me feel unsafe. You built a trap around my car, a fence," I corrected, "on my land. And then you talked to the deputy like you were the reasonable one." I couldn't help it. I laughed, not loudly, just a baffled exhale. "You called the police because you parked illegally." She stiffened, as if the word illegally physically stung. "You're twisting things," she said. "I parked in a common area." "No," I replied. "You parked on private property." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "I've spoken to some people," she said, with that vague tone again. "And they told me you've been difficult in the past. With neighbors." "I don't have neighbors," I said. "My closest one is 2 miles away." She blinked. "Well, maybe not neighbors, but people in town. They said you're territorial." I almost laughed again, but it wasn't funny anymore. It was shifting. She was trying to reconstruct the narrative, turn herself into the victim and me into the antagonist. "Karen," I said slowly, "why are you here?" She hesitated, like she hadn't planned for me to be so direct. Because I'm offering you an opportunity to fix this before it becomes a problem, she said. If you remove the fence, I won't pursue anything. Pursue what? There's nothing to pursue. She exhaled sharply. You don't understand how these things work. If someone feels unsafe, they can file reports. They can document patterns. They can get community support. I stared at her, trying to decide if she genuinely believed what she was saying or if she was bluffing her way through some misguided strategy. You're threatening me, I said. I'm informing you, she corrected. If you refuse to cooperate, I can't control what happens next. I slipped my gloves back on. I'm not removing the fence, I said. And this conversation is over. She stood there for a few seconds, maybe expecting me to reconsider, maybe waiting for me to apologize for something I hadn't done. When I didn't, she turned sharply and walked away, her boots crunching on the gravel like punctuation marks. I watched her go, feeling a mixture of disbelief and irritation. She wasn't angry anymore, she was strategic. And strategic people didn't give up. That evening, I got a voicemail from the winery owner, a soft-spoken guy named Mark who'd always been polite. His message was nervous. Hey, look, I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but someone came by today saying you were blocking access to public parking and creating a hazard. I told her the turnout wasn't ours, but she insisted she was going to bring it up at the next county meeting. Just giving you a heads up. County meeting. That phrase hit harder than her silly letter. Karen wasn't just complaining anymore, she was mobilizing. And people who mobilize often find someone willing to listen, especially when the target is a quiet farmer who keeps to himself. I walked outside, stood in the open turnout where she used to park, and tried to imagine the version of the story she'd pitched to a room full of people who didn't know me. I pictured her describing me as aggressive, unhinged, territorial, the type to trap a car, while leaving out the part where she repeatedly ignored boundaries. And suddenly, quietly, I realized this fight was far from over. I just didn't yet know the direction it was about to take. The county meeting wasn't for another 2 weeks, but the ripple effects of Karen's campaign started almost immediately, the way a small stone thrown into water sends out circles far wider than you expect. 2 days after Mark's voicemail, I was in town picking up some bolts for the baler when I noticed 2 women near the hardware store entrance staring at me while whispering. Not the usual friendly curiosity small towns have toward farmers, but the tight, speculative kind people get when they've heard a story they're still deciding whether to believe. By the time I stepped inside, I could feel the atmosphere shift just enough to make me uncomfortable, nothing overt, just a couple of glances that lingered half a second too long. I didn't say anything. Small towns run on narratives, and once one starts spreading, it gains speed until it eventually burns itself out. I figured that's what was happening and didn't add fuel to it. But when I got home, I found a second envelope under my gate latch. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten, in neat script, folded carefully like someone wanted to signal politeness even while complaining. We heard about the incident with the vehicle. Please remember this road is shared by all of us who live here. Creating hostility doesn't help anyone. No name. No return address. Just anonymous disappointment. I didn't even have neighbors, not within shouting distance. The note made no sense unless someone had gone door to door looking for allies. Karen didn't live on my road, but she had something better: the ability to make her version of events sound like civic concern. It didn't take long to confirm that suspicion. The next afternoon, I drove to the winery to talk to Mark in person. I found him leaning against the railing near the tasting room, wiping down a table with a rag. When he saw me, he gave a small, apologetic smile. I was hoping you'd come by, he said. Things getting weird? I asked. A bit, he admitted. She's persistent. He hesitated, glancing toward the parking area like he expected her to reappear. She was here again yesterday. Told me she was gathering information on rural access rights. I rubbed my forehead. Did she mention my name? Not directly, he said. But she described you. The fence. The police visit. The whole thing. She said she was worried about safety issues for visitors. I couldn't help letting out a humorless laugh. Safety issues? She's the one blocking a farm gate. Mark looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. I know, he said. But you know how people are. They hear something dramatic, and suddenly it's the only version that sticks. I nodded, not because I liked it, but because it was true. Before I left, he added, I don't think the county will take her seriously. They get complaints all the time about nonsense, but just be prepared. She seems determined. Determined was an understatement. Over the next week, the rumors grew legs. Someone at the feed store asked if I was doing okay with the trespassing issue, a phrase vague enough to make my stomach tighten. At the gas station, a man I barely knew asked if I'd gotten that aggressive fencing thing squared away. Every version I heard made me sound a little more unhinged. It wasn't malicious, just gossip mutating as it traveled. Still, it wore on me. The worst part wasn't the town's shifting perception. It was the silence on my road. Karen didn't come back. No Tesla. No confrontations. No sarcastic note. The quiet felt fragile, like the air just before hail hit. On the Friday before the county meeting, the storm finally arrived, not in the way I expected, but in the way she'd clearly planned. Late afternoon, as I was finishing a repair on the south pasture fence line, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. When I walked back toward the house, I saw a silver SUV parked neatly in the turnout where Karen used to wedge her Tesla. Standing beside it was a man in a navy windbreaker holding a clipboard. The kind of man who introduced himself using his full name and job title. Afternoon, he said as I approached. You the property owner? I am, I said. Can I help you? He flipped a page on his clipboard. I'm with the county's Community Safety Liaison Office. We received a complaint about a potentially hazardous obstruction on your property. My stomach sank. The fence. Yes, he said. I'd like to take a look if that's all right. I gestured for him to follow. We walked toward the fenced rectangle, which still stood exactly as it had that morning after I cleaned up some loose wire. He examined it with a neutral expression, stepping around it, checking the distance between the boards and the ground, tapping one of the posts like he was testing structural integrity. After a minute, he scribbled something down. This isn't obstructing any public path, he said. And it's not unsafe. It's well built, actually. Thank you, I said. He gave a small shrug. We get a lot of complaints that turn out to be misunderstandings. His phrasing was diplomatic, but I could tell what he meant. Some people weaponized complaints. Can I ask what the complaint said? I asked. He paused. It claimed you intentionally blocked a vehicle in as retaliation during a personal dispute, potentially creating a safety risk. It also alleged the fence was intimidating to visitors. Intimidating? He looked at me with the faintest hint of embarrassment. The language wasn't mine. Was the complaint anonymous? I asked, already knowing the answer. Yes, he said. But anonymous complaints hold very little weight. Once I file my report, the case will be closed. There's nothing wrong here. Relief washed through me, more than I expected. But before I could thank him again, he added, however, there is one thing you should know. He lowered his voice slightly. The complainants said they intend to bring this up at the county meeting next week. They phrased it like a public safety issue. I exhaled slowly. Of course they did. He tucked his clipboard under his arm. It won't go anywhere, he said. The county won't debate a private fencing issue. But it may still come up. I appreciate the heads up, I said. He nodded and headed back to his SUV. I stood there for a long moment after he left, staring at the little fenced rectangle in the gravel. It wasn't even about the fence anymore. She wanted the narrative. She wanted to be the aggrieved party. She wanted to be heard. And she wasn't going to stop until someone listened. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the western trees and cast long shadows across the turnout, I sat on the porch steps and tried to sort through what to do. Removing the fence felt like a concession she didn't deserve. Leaving it up ensured the fight continued. I didn't like the idea of a conflict spilling into a public forum. But I also didn't like the idea of being pushed around by someone who refused to take responsibility for her own choices. And then, sometime around dusk, as crickets started chirping in the tall grass, an idea formed, not dramatic, not spiteful, just a quiet, stubborn decision. A line. A boundary. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I knew exactly what I was going to do at that county meeting. The county meeting fell on a Tuesday evening, one of those oddly warm nights where the air feels thick and restless, like it hasn't decided whether to rain or hold everything in. I arrived early, not because I wanted a good seat, but because I wanted a quiet moment to steady myself. The community center smelled like old carpet and coffee that had been sitting on a warmer too long, and a handful of people lingered near the entrance chatting in low voices. Most of them were regulars. Ranchers checking on zoning updates, retirees who came for the social aspect, the occasional business owner waiting for permit approvals. I'd only come to these meetings a few times in the years I'd lived here, usually when the county discussed road maintenance. I took a seat near the back, folded my hands, and tried not to glance at the door every 5 seconds. But when she finally walked in, hair perfectly straightened, clean blazer despite the heat, carrying a folder like she was presenting at a corporate retreat, every conversation in the room paused just a beat. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to confirm what I already suspected. She had been talking to people. She spotted me almost immediately. Her eyes lingered in that way people look at a problem they're about to solve. Then she found a seat near the front, crossing her legs neatly, posture rigid with anticipation. When the meeting began, the usual agenda items went by quickly. Budget approvals, updates on county equipment purchases, confirmation that the East Roads washout repairs would begin next month. I kept waiting for my name, or worse, the phrase public safety concern, but nothing came. My shoulders had just begun to loosen when the county chair asked, "Does anyone have any new issues to bring before the board?" Karen's hand shot up like a student eager for extra credit. The chair recognized her. "Yes, ma'am." She stood, smoothing her blazer, and turned toward the room with a practiced expression, measured concern mixed with subtle distress. "I'm here because I've witnessed an emerging safety issue in our rural community," she began, projecting her voice with the confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Specifically involving private landowners obstructing access to shared road areas and creating potentially dangerous situations for visitors." I closed my eyes for a second, not because I was surprised, but because hearing her package everything into that polished sentence made my stomach clench. "Over the past month," she continued, "I've noticed an individual repeatedly blocking what many community members have reasonably understood to be an informal public turnout area. Recently, this escalated when a vehicle, mine, was deliberately enclosed with a fence, restricting movement for hours." A few people in the room murmured, confused. She held up a piece of paper, likely a photo of the fence, and passed copies to the board members like she was distributing evidence. "I was unable to retrieve my car," she said, "and I felt trapped. Vulnerable. Intimidated. Vulnerable." The word hung in the air like a manipulative perfume. I sat still, jaw tight, waiting. She went on. "The individual responsible refused to remove the fence until law enforcement intervened. I'm here because I worry others, deliveries, emergency vehicles, unsuspecting visitors, might face the same hostility. Hostility. Intimidation." She was crafting a narrative, and she was good at it. When she finished, she folded her hands calmly as if expecting applause for her civic concern. The county chair blinked, clearly uncertain what he'd just heard. "Thank you," he said cautiously. "Is the property owner in question present?" Every head turned toward me. I stood slowly, not because I wanted to but because sitting would have felt like conceding. The chair gestured for me to approach the front. As I walked through the narrow aisle, I felt the weight of people assessing me, trying to decide which version of the story made more sense. When I reached the front, the chair asked, "Sir, would you like to respond?" I nodded. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I think some context is missing." I turned first to the board, then to the room, making sure I didn't sound defensive, just factual. That turnout isn't public. It isn't shared. It's fully on my private property. I have the county parcel map showing that. When the complainant parked there repeatedly, blocking my gate, I asked her multiple times to stop. She didn't. Eventually, I fenced the section of my own land that she kept using without permission. The fence didn't touch her car. It didn't damage anything. It was simply on my property. A few people nodded. A few exchanged glances. I kept going. On the day in question, she called the police. The responding deputy checked the map and confirmed I was within my rights. He told her she'd need my permission to drive out since she was on private land. She agreed not to park there again. I let the room absorb that. One of the board members, an older man with a white beard, leaned forward. "So the fence didn't block the road?" "Not even close," I said. "It was entirely inside my property line." Another board member asked, "And you didn't lock her car in as retaliation?" "No," I said. "I fenced the area because words weren't making boundaries clear." Karen shifted in her seat, jaw tightening. She raised her hand. "But I felt unsafe," she interjected, voice wavering just enough to sound emotional. "Isn't that what matters?" This was threatening behavior. The board chair looked between us. "Did he ever threaten you?" She hesitated. "Not directly," she said. "But the fence was legal," I said calmly. She turned toward me. "You're missing the point." "Maybe," I said, "but you parked on private land. Repeatedly. After being asked not to. That's the point." The room fell quiet. The chair finally cleared his throat. "We appreciate both of you bringing this forward. But this appears to be a civil disagreement, not a public safety issue. Fencing on private property is allowed as long as it doesn't impede public road. Based on what we're hearing, that requirement was met." Karen looked stunned. "So you're not going to do anything?" "Ma'am," the chair said gently, "there's nothing for the county to do. You can pursue civil action if you choose, but we don't regulate how someone fences their own land." Her face flushed. Not with anger but with humiliation, the kind that comes when someone realizes their performance didn't land. She didn't speak again. After the meeting concluded, people filed out slowly, and a few stopped me to ask questions. Not accusatory, just curious. A couple of ranchers nodded approvingly, muttering something about city folks not understanding property lines. By the time I stepped outside, the air felt lighter, as if the tension had finally broken. I walked toward my truck, mentally preparing for the long drive home. But then I saw Karen standing near her car, arms crossed, posture stiff as a fence post. She wasn't leaving. She was waiting for me. For a second, I considered walking the long way around the parking lot. But that felt cowardly, and despite everything, I didn't want this to turn into an endless cycle of avoidance. So I approached her, stopping about 6 feet away. She didn't speak right away. When she finally did, her voice was quiet but sharp. "You embarrassed me in there." "I told the truth," I said. "That's all." She stared at me, and something shifted in her expression. Not anger, not regret, something closer to disbelief that her strategy hadn't worked. "You could have just moved the fence," she said. "You could have just stopped parking on my land," I replied. She didn't answer. But the silence wasn't the triumphant kind. It was the kind that signaled something was ending. A fight, a narrative, maybe even her interest in the whole situation. Finally, she opened her car door, paused, and said, "This isn't over." Then she got in and drove off. As the tail lights disappeared into the dark, I wasn't sure whether her words were a threat, a habit, or just leftover pride refusing to let go. What I did know, standing there in the warm night, was that things had reached a breaking point, and whatever came next would finally reveal whether this was just pettiness, or something deeper. For the next week, I waited for whatever Karen meant by, "This isn't over," though I had no idea what shape it would take. Sometimes, with people like her, the threat is the whole point, an exit line meant to leave you unsettled. Other times, it's a promise. But the days passed quietly, almost suspiciously so. No anonymous letters. No rumors drifting back to me from town. No silver SUV from the county pulling up to inspect something she complained about. The absence of noise didn't bring relief. It brought unease. I kept working around the farm, patching fence lines, checking the tractor's hydraulic lines, repairing a loose gutter on the barn. Every mundane task felt slightly heavier, like I was waiting for a storm that couldn't decide when to break. Then, on Thursday evening, as the sun was sinking behind the distant ridge and the cows were milling near the trough waiting for their last feed, I heard tires on gravel. Slow, measured, deliberate. I stepped out of the barn and wiped my hands on my jeans. A dark blue sedan, a rental by the look of it, was parked in the turnout. Not blocking anything, just sitting neatly, engine running. A man got out, maybe mid-40s, dressed casually but with an air of someone used to navigating uncomfortable conversations. He approached me with a neutral smile. "Evening," he said. "You must be the property owner." "I am," I said. "Can I help you?" He stopped a respectful distance away. "I'm here because of a situation involving a woman named Karen Miller." His tone was careful, like he didn't want to give away more than necessary. "And you are?" He cleared his throat softly. "Her brother." I blinked. That was not what I expected. "I want to start by saying," he continued, "I'm not here to argue with you, accuse you, or demand anything. I just want to talk." That alone made him feel like a completely different species from his sister. "All right," I said. "Let's talk." He nodded once, as if relieved I hadn't shut the door on the conversation. "She told me what happened," he said. "Or her version of it. I've learned over the years to fact-check before getting involved." I appreciated the honesty. He glanced around, the barn, the pasture, the fence line, the neat rectangle still standing in the gravel like a quiet monument to boundary issues. "I take it that's the fence?" "That's it," I said. "Still hasn't touched anything it wasn't supposed to." He gave a faint smile. "She described it like something out of a hostage negotiation." "It's not even 4 feet tall," I said. He nodded again, sighing. "Look, my sister, she has a tendency to create conflict when she feels ignored or disrespected. She doesn't always see how her actions affect other people. And when she feels embarrassed, she pushes back twice as hard." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. "I drove down here," he continued, "because after that meeting, she called me in tears. Not because she felt wronged, but because she felt humiliated. And when she gets humiliated, she can make destructive decisions. I've seen it happen." "What kind of decisions?" I asked cautiously. He took a moment before answering. "Legal threats, public accusations, social media campaigns. Things that get messy fast and don't help anyone." I could imagine it all too easily. "I'm not here to defend her," he added quickly. "I'm here because I'd like to find a way to keep this from escalating further." His sincerity felt real, unpolished, nothing like Karen's performative concern. "I'm not looking for a fight," I said. "Never was. I just didn't want my gate blocked." "I know," he said. "And honestly, I told her she was wrong. I told her she had no business parking here. But telling her something is one thing, getting her to accept it is another." He rubbed the back of his neck. "This isn't about the fence anymore. It's about her pride." That much was obvious. We stood there for a moment, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the faint ticking of his cooling engine. Finally, he said, "I can get her to drop this. All of it. No more complaints, no more gossip, no county meetings, no letters, nothing. But I need something from you, too. I felt my shoulders tense. What? Take the fence down, he said gently. Not because you did anything wrong. You didn't. But because leaving it up keeps the story alive in her mind. It keeps the wound open. I looked at the fence, my line in the sand, my quiet boundary that started all this. If I take it down, I said slowly, will she really stop? Yes, he said without hesitation. Because I'll make sure of it. She listens to me more than she'll ever admit. And truthfully, she's already embarrassed enough. She wants it to go away, even if she won't say that out loud. I studied his face. There was no angle, no manipulation. Just a tired man trying to keep his sister from imploding her life. All right, I said finally. I'll take it down. His shoulders dropped with relief. Thank you. Truly. The next morning, as the sun rose over the pasture, I walked out with my tools and dismantled the fence piece by piece. The boards came up easily, the wire rolled smoothly, the T-posts lifted with that familiar metal groan. I stacked everything neatly by the barn, and when I stepped back, the gravel turnout looked the way it had before all this started, unremarkable, ordinary, empty. It felt strange. Not like defeat, but like closing a chapter. Around noon, Karen's brother returned, same rental car, same quiet demeanor. He stepped out, looked at the clear turnout, and nodded. I appreciate this more than you know, he said. I'll talk to her. It's over. Good, I said. That's all I wanted. He hesitated a moment. For what it's worth, he said, you handled this better than most people would've. After he left, the road settled back into its familiar silence. No cars. No notes. No phone calls. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. One afternoon, I drove into town, half wondering if someone would bring up the fence saga again. No one did. Whatever rumor had been spreading had either faded or been replaced by a newer one. That's how small towns work. A month later, while I was hauling hay bales across the pasture, I saw a white Tesla drive past. Not stopping, not slowing, just continuing down the road. Karen didn't look toward my gate. She kept her eyes straight ahead, posture stiff, hands at 10 and 2. I didn't wave, and she didn't either. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't resentment. It was something closer to acknowledgement, a quiet acceptance that we'd reached the limit of whatever this conflict had been. The line had been drawn, crossed, redrawn, argued over, and finally put to rest. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills and the barn cats prowled along the fence rail, I sat on the porch and let the quiet finally settle in. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't victory. It wasn't even triumph. It was closure, the grounded, unglamorous kind real life gives you. The kind without applause, without cinematic payoff, without dramatic last lines. Just the simple knowledge that a boundary, once fought over, had finally been understood. And maybe that was enough.